Well, she is an author, researcher, educator, expert witness, and she has done more to expose the fraud in so-called sex, science, and education than anybody else on this planet. No exception to that rule. She's been fighting on this issue on the very front line since 1977. And not only that, she is a dang fine human being. Welcome to the Dr. Gina Show, Dr. Judith Reisman.
Well, Dr. Gina, I am delighted to be here with you after all these years. Yes.
Right, I know. And I told my audience, because they needed to know, that you are the person that I remember watching you when I was very young in my career. I think I was maybe in the process of my first master's degree, and you were the one that I looked at and said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. You have gone on, since I first heard you speak about these issues, to fight these issues literally all over the world. But I want to back up, and I even want to get to the whole Miley Cyrus thing, but I want to back up to what really has happened to us as a culture. Let's do this. Let's do this so that folks can understand. There once upon a time, there was a Freud and then a Kinsey. Tell us about Kinsey for those who haven't read your book, Crimes and Consequences.
Well, there have been now several of the books. I have to send them
That's
to
true.
you, actually.
That's true.
The last one. Yeah. Yeah, because I just assumed when I found that Kinsey was Dr. Alfred Kinsey at Indiana University, the father of the human sexuality field. There was no such field before him. Human sexuality therapy, sex education, all this sort of thing. When I, found that this man was responsible for sexual atrocities, and I use my words properly here, sexual atrocities against children and infants as young as 2 months of age, I just thought, well, I'll send these charts and graphs to the ethics people. In my field, this was way back in the 70s, actually, and they'll take care of this. Oh, my goodness, it's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they didn't.
And so they really left it to you to build an entire organization, formulate all of your own research, and prove all of this to be exactly what it was.
Yeah, and I was pretty stunned. I was very liberal at the time and very foolish, and just assumed that as soon as you presented information that was irrefutable about the father of our sexual education structure, and that these were sex atrocities against children, much less all of the fraud, in the research, because, of course, all of Kinsey's research was basically fraud, not even any question about it. When I say all, I mean all. So, nobody seemed to care, and it took me years to figure out why, and it turns out that, well, most everybody was using his research. They all quoted him. It was in all of their own sociology, anthropology, psychology, and, of course, sexuality findings and so forth. How are they going to admit that they've been quoting an American Mengele all these years and leading us in these directions? No, so nobody would do it.
I mean, and these were actually crimes that happened, were exacted on Nazi prisoners of war and babies. And I'll never forget reading in your first book, Crimes and Consequences, which is really a handbook on the fallacy of sex in our culture. I know you've had several awesome follow-ups since then, but I'll never forget reading the first time in Crimes and Consequences, and this has to be going back decades virtually. And I remember reading the words that these experiments were done on babies, and they would stimulate the babies, and if the babies then cried, they would say, see, that means that the baby is sexually aroused. Crying is a symbol of sexual arousal. That's how they came to the conclusion that we are sexual from birth, and there's no way to escape it, and that's really virtually all we are, is a bundle of sexual energy. Am I paraphrasing that okay?
Yes, that's quite accurate. Yeah, and I read that in Kinsey's own book. This was the most well-covered book, thousands and thousands of articles, scores of books written on it, and then later I realized all of our laws changed, based on it. And I'm looking at these data, and I'm saying, wait a minute, the only person in the world who could describe little children fainting, having convulsions, screaming, writhing in pain, and enjoying that and calling that an orgasm would be a sadomasochistic pedophile or pederast, and that, of course, was Kinsey. He indeed was a bi-homosexual, whatever you want to call it. I don't care, but he was certainly not normal. Man who enjoyed being tortured and who enjoyed torturing other people and who appears to have died, actually, of sexual abuse of his own organs. Hi, nice chat. You know, okay, from a disease called orchitis. And so, you know, he was a sexual psychopath, a completely unregenerate psychopath, and brought about him men of similar belief systems who would not reveal him. And this shaped everything. It shaped all of our laws, absolutely. No fault divorce, the whole ball game.
Mm-hmm. And now, Judith, even in these days, we'll still hear some probably well-intentioned, perhaps even conservative, perhaps even religious leaders quoting Kinsey as the quintessential expert on all sexual science. I remember Reverend Dobson citing him in something that he wrote once upon a time. I'm sure Reverend Dobson knows better than that now, but this still goes on today, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I just finished doing some basic research on how bad it is still in our laws, in our law journals, and of course in our cases. And it started in 1948, and we still have 2013. Our law journals are still quoting Kinsey. Our cases that are in the courts are still using Kinsey as though these are viable data. I mean, you know, who's quoting the research that was done on the blacks in Tuskegee, for heaven's sake? And yet we're using Kinsey to shape our sex laws, to teach our children about sex in the classroom. You know, no wonder we have little girls doing like Miley. No wonder we have these Miley Cyruses, you know. No wonder we had poor Brooke Shields in that ad saying nothing comes between me and my Calvins. You know, no wonder we have generations of disordered and disturbed people who think that children are sexual from birth and do advertise that it's okay to have sex with kids. Yeah, we breeded it. Yeah, we breeded them.
So Judith, break down for me where does our sexuality fit into our lives? You know, you and I spoke at length. You and I think could sit and talk for the rest of our lives and just probably die from talking. But you know, you and I talked in depth about last time we were together at the Awakening Conference, I believe it was. We talked about how it's such a misnomer, so popularly accepted that we are all just sexually driven at all times on all things. But the problem is that people tend to think in black and white terms. They tend to think, well, if you don't think that babies are sexual, they do the if-then, and they say, well, then that means you're a prude, you don't like sex. You and I talked about sex is a great thing. It is, and I want you to expound on what is the proper role of sex in our culture? What is great about sex? What do you wish this culture would understand about the good things of sex?
Well, you know, it's not like it was a big secret. I mean, Shakespeare certainly has written about it. His sonnet, I think it was 120. I have to go back and see which one it was. I love the sonnet he wrote on the difference between lust, okay, and what it does to the human being, and quote-unquote love in his works on love. And, of course, biblically, you know, we read over and over again. There's not a lot new. Aristotle had it down. You know, I mean, it goes all the way back. Sex is a powerful experience. It's designed to be a powerful experience. And for those of us who believe in what God, quote-unquote, you know, designed for the human being, it's supposed to, as one rabbi said to me once, it's supposed to keep the fires burning in the marriage, not burn the marriage down, you know, not burn the house down.
Right.
And yeah, so it can be it can be certainly misused. It's there for the joy and the thrilling ability to create together a man and a woman, to join together and And to do that, there has to be a body of trust between these two. So when we began to move into experimental sexual activity, thank you very much, Dr. Kinsey, because our World War II guys were pretty much straight-laced. Tom Brokaw did a beautiful job on that. And when we begin to use sex for its own purpose instead of using it within our love relationship to establish strong communication, to build a life and so forth, we do ourselves a great injustice, and we end up with Miley Cyrus standing there on a stage, mimicking masturbatory activity, and somebody behind her, a male, looking as though there's more, that should be going on. So this is abuse, and that's exploitation, and yes, there's nothing that can be exploited more than sex. Absolutely nothing. Nothing as powerful, nothing as important that therefore can yield to such exploitation. And that's what we've seen happening as we move into sex trafficking of children all across the world, in our own country. So, yeah, we step over that line and we move into exploitation, and there is no end to that. It does not stop.
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to keep you into the next segment, which I do very rarely on my show. But if you can stay with me for one more segment, I want to get into your work that you've done around the world and, of course, your work that you've done with regard to Playboy. Could you kind of stay around for that, Judith?
Oh, for you, Dr. Gina.
Okay, awesome. We'll be back in just a moment with, my opinion, the world's leading expert on the science of sexuality. That is Dr. Judith Reisman. Stay with us. More right after this. God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best T-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com. docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was founded over 35 years ago. Gun Owners of America is here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. Gun Owners of America has been called the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Join today at gunowners.org.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
Hi, this is Joe Dan Gorman of Intellectual Frog Legs. Ain't no liberals say I have every phobia out there. They say I'm a homophobe, an Islamophobe, even a Michelle Obama-phobe. Well, actually, I am kind of scared of her. So, with all these fruitcake phobias, I'm bound to be on my last leg. So you probably ought to hurry on over to intellectualfroglegs.com. See what Chuck Woolery's calling the best new media he's seen. That's intellectualfroglegs.com.
This is Dick Morris. If you're diagnosed with liberalism, Dr. Gina will cure you.
Well, you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show. We appreciate you joining us as we break down these issues that come before us every day, keeping us busy and on our toes, when so much of it, honestly, goes back to what my current guest studies and has been studying really since 1977. She's the author of many books, including the first one that I read that made me the fan, Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences. This is an absolute must-read for all conservatives. Also, sexual sabotage, how one mad scientist unleashed a plague of corruption and contagion on America. The Kinsey corruption is another one. She has many. You'll have to check out her site. That is drjudithreisman.org. And without further ado, welcome back, Dr. Judith Reisman.
Delighted to be back here, Gina. My goodness, it was a delight to see you, just recently, and to know that I had helped sway a lovely young lady like you who'd gone on to do such important work. I was just thrilled.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you've done for this country, but the reality is that you have done this all over the world. Talk to us a little bit about the work you've done abroad, because the sexualizing of a culture, it doesn't stay in one country, does it? Tell us about that.
No, it doesn't at all, especially when it's the United States of America, right? I mean, we have shaped anyway until China recently, but even China, the Kinsey Institute published a new book called Kinsey, the Man Who Changed the World, and it was translated into Chinese, and some Chinese professors got in touch with me. They wanted to translate my book into Chinese because they said that Kinsey's book was absolutely radicalizing the Chinese youth. They were carrying on sexually in ways they had absolutely never done before in that country. But the most exciting thing was my recent trip to Croatia, and this brings in the pedophile aspect of things, because you can't separate Kinsey from pedophilia. You can't separate Hugh Hefner from pedophilia, since Hugh Hefner said he would be Kinsey's pamphleteer. He couldn't help it, So I was in Croatia, and it turned out that the Croatian government was they had implemented a Kinsey training for the Croatian children. You're talking about almost over 90% of the public being Catholic, and the still resilient, commie kind of based, government controllers there had put into place this sex education curriculum, which was promoted by Dr. Stolhofer. Mr. Soros had brought in a bunch of sexologists to Croatia to help them become, more modern. And amongst those sexologists were a group of pedophiles that I knew quite well. And this was going to be implemented in the Croatian sex education curriculum like ours. And it went to the Croatian Supreme Court, and by golly, a unanimous ruling was a couple of months ago that they would not permit this curriculum to be taught. It was against everything that the parents, the public, wanted, and so we'll see what happens there. But it was eliminated. Also in Switzerland, they eliminated the sex education funding in Switzerland based on the fraud that had been perpetrated. But it's a battle because it's a huge industry. I call it, the sex industrial complex. Big Pharma is making a fortune from all these dysfunctional people, as you know, from A to Z, from the vaccines to the little kiddies to the Viagras for the impotent young men, and our young men are, increasingly becoming impotent as they become addicted to porn. Well, I took a breath now.
No, and it is exactly right, because you have fought on these issues, and you're very humble. It's hard to get you to just straight up say what you've done, but you've actually had lawsuits against Playboy in other countries, and you've won. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, probably the most exciting one was to win against Playboy in the Netherlands. I try to tell people here, if you can win against Playboy on child pornography in the Netherlands, you can win anywhere. Yeah, I was doing a Christian television program. Very few television programs let me on, except the Christian ones. And this was in the Netherlands. And I said on that program, and I showed, the images from Playboy, that Playboy had been promoting breeding, pedophiles, promoting pedophilia and sex abuse of children since 1954, really, in the small cartoons. Then they grew with boys, and then they moved it into little girls, and then they moved it into full-color cartoons, and then they moved it into photographs. So it was very deliberate. And I said that Playboy was a a #1 child pornographer. That was in 1994, and that was correct at the time. And so they sued me. Playboy sued me
it was them
for
that sued
libel.
You. Okay.
Yeah, they sued me for libel and slander. Yeah, and so the poor TV company, they wrote me, we're going to be ruined. So I sent them a truckload of well-documented images, pages, everything straight, the original.
And when you say you sent them these, I mean, you went back and you found images of Playboy producing photographs of children, and you had your proof, right, exactly, and you had your proof right there.
Oh yeah, I don't say anything I can't prove. That'd be ridiculous.
Yeah.
So so the judge ruled amazingly in my favor. I mean, because look, the Netherlands was the center of pedophilia at the time. They produced the Journal of Pedophilia in the Netherlands, and so we had everything going against us. But the judge ruled in our favor and said that everything that I had said was substantiated by the material. So when Playboy complained and they said that this was unfair, so the judge said, well, then you should sue her in the United States. You have a huge publication over there. You know, go sue her there. Well, they would never do that here because they do not. The last thing Playboy wants is to let me get in a courtroom with them and show a jury, you know, what we have been conditioned by over the last 30 years, 40 years.
Exactly. Well, I certainly do so much appreciate the work you've done, and I wish that there, you know, the intellectually honest liberals should be all over this, Judith. The intellectually honest so-called feminists who rally against misogyny and then don't really want to have these discussions, probably went to see the awful Kinsey movie, probably buy all of the products that include all of this research, which isn't even research at all, by Alfred Kinsey, and continue to propagate the crimes on, not just on women, but also on children. And this has been the focus of your work all your life. Do you see things getting better or getting worse? And what role can those of us who understand what you're saying, what can we do about it?
Oh, I'm so pleased you asked me that. Well, of course things are getting worse. I mean, that, you know, anybody who doesn't notice that is talk about being asleep at the switch, you know. And we talk about the Germans not observing what was going on around them in the concentration camps. Well, come on, you know, what do we see happening to our children? What are our children being taught in the classroom? They're shown pornography in the classroom, for crying out loud, and it's definitively pornography of various kinds. So, yeah, things are getting worse, obviously, but sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. So one of the big things that I would like to see happen is that, you know, we campaign for a congressional investigation of the Kinsey Institute, the frauds, the crimes against children, the atrocities committed against children as young as 2 months of age. And that, I think, would open the door to a great deal of information that's been kept from the public. You know, we almost got the investigation in 1995, and then, unfortunately, the Kinsey Institute was they were about to be thrown out of Indiana University, but because they were afraid that the investigation was going to hit. But the Ford Foundation stepped in, Rockefeller Foundation stepped in, Playboy stepped in, and they all started funding the Kinsey Institute, which is still, to this day, receiving what they call sex histories from from people, and those histories have historically included records of rapes of children. So there's reason, a lot of reason, to investigate the Kinsey Institute, to investigate what they did, the cover-ups by Indiana University. And look, this is a much bigger story than Sandusky ever was. And, you know, even if they did go after the 3 Mile people, we're not doing. But this is huge, absolutely huge. So
we'll hope
got
that they
to get that investigation.
Yes, absolutely. And folks can stay in touch with your work at Dr. Judith Reisman, REISMAN.org. Dr. Judith Reisman, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for your work and for your continued passion on this topic. exposing
Dr.
the
Gina,
crimes.
it's a delight to be with you as always.
All right, my friend. God bless you. Coming
Bless
up
you.
next, Joe Messina. He scours the deepest, darkest crevices for stories you will hear nowhere else. Stay tuned for him right after this.